He's employed at Golder, who's done quite a bit of work for us in the past. And Anthony's a bit of a mapping geek, I should say,
Very much so.
with big interest in GIS and mapping active transportation. So he's going to be presenting on urban design and health and well-being with a focus on active transportation.
Exactly. Thank you so much to giving me this space to talk about something I'm really passionate about. This is an area of work that we're certainly developing. As some of you may know, Golder's traditionally a geotech mining company, but they purchased a company called HB Lanark, which was quite well known for its sustainable planning. So I work within the new division, which is the Urban Planning and Landscape Architecture Group, which is called the Sustainable Communities Group. So I do want this to be kind of informal. If people have questions along the way, I definitely don't want to talk for half an hour straight with someone with a burning question. Before I begin, I have a bit of a structured presentation, but I wanted to show you a few things right off the bat. This is the first map. I don't know if anyone here is a mountain biker. I know at least one at the table is. This is some data from a website called Strava, which shows all the tracks of people doing mostly recreational biking or hiking. So Squamish is known as a very active place. We know that's the outdoor recreation capital of Canada. But it's interesting that there's not a lot of tracks through the downtown core. These are all off-road recreational trails. So I think there's a huge opportunity to improve the utilitarian infrastructure. The recreational infrastructure seems to be quite good. And just to give you a little more background on what I do, I generally make maps to support all types of projects, including environmental assessments and all sorts of different projects. But my focus really is on active transportation. So here's a master plan we did for District of Kelowna, for example. And we're also really focused on the implementation side. So not just putting a bunch of lines on the map, but we build out specific plans to get them built. And the other thing I do want to kind of underscore, this isn't a sales pitch. I'm here basically to talk about what I'm passionate about. This is a developing area within Golder's business, but by no means I think there's too much work for one company to do, and I think this is a lot more about giving you guys some inspiration to just do great things for your city. It's not really about hiring us to do anything specific. So this, for example, was I think what got Suzanne to call me in the first place was I was doing some walkability mapping for the city, or the whole Metro Vancouver region. And this map shows basically areas of the city that are more walkable, and that's a term I'll define a little later. But this is kind of a new emerging realm of urban planning and the idea of designing cities around people instead of cars. And we'll talk more about that. And the last thing I want to show you, in terms of being a world leader, I think Squamish has an opportunity to really build on its success as a recreation hub. This is just a news story from last week or so. This guy's created a solar-powered bike. He was on the CBC National News with George Strombolopoulos. So it's kind of maybe Squamish has a lot of opportunity to build in active transportation. So table contents for this evening's presentation. I'm going to go for about 40 minutes or so. Lots of time for questions, but I'll start with just some overviews, get us all on the same page, show a quick video about active transportation, talk about some ideas about how the physical environment influences our health and the physical environment influences our behavior, which in turn influences our health, and actually influences our genetic code as well. We'll talk more about that. Some background mapping. In preparing for this, I basically went out and looked at every map I could find on Squamish, so some of that you may have seen, but it's nice to look at it all with a fresh perspective. And I also pulled some recent data from the new the census, which is now called, it's the long-form census, it's the National Household Survey, and looking at some other city maps that I think Dan may have had a role in playing, so I'm really happy you're here. And then some more walkability maps, and talking, actually this last section is where I really want to save some time because there's some interesting work I've been involved with the 5 regional health authorities as well as Provincial Health Service Authority on their Healthy Built Environment Alliance, which is kind of this group of health people trying to figure out how to reframe their message to talk with planners more effectively and build communities that influence positive health outcomes. So there's some cool linkages that take planning principles and link that across to the health evidence, and giving you some good arguments for why to invest in healthy communities.
Sorry, can I ask one question?
Yeah.
With those walkability maps, the one you showed us about Vancouver, Greater Vancouver, what type of data do you get for that? Are those surveys of people, or?
No, it's an objective measure of the built environment. So it's road networks, it's destinations, it's walkability in its most basic sense. That's actually where I'm going, so I'll just skip through to that. No, you're right on cue. So here are a few keywords I want to make sure we're all on the same page about. Active transportation. That is quite simply moving with your own power and using your legs with the power of a bicycle. Sustainable transportation is often in the same realm, and that includes use of public transit. But active transportation also includes skateboards, scooters. There's wheelchairs should be definitely considered. Walkability is kind of this emerging thing. There's walkscore.com, where I'll show you some maps from. And a colleague I used to work with at UBC named Larry Frank is in the SCARP, School of Community and Regional Planning at UBC. He's been a pioneer in this field. So he's developed quite a few different methods to quantify walkability, and basically comes down to a few key factors. How square is your road network? So a nice tight grid like you have in downtown is great. These kinds of suburban lollipops that are being built all over the world are not very walkable in the traditional sense, because they do, basically to get from A to B, you have to go all the way around. And there are some examples of that in the city as well. Built environment, generally, I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. That's everything in my mind. That's what humans do to change the planet. But there's a lot of opportunity to do really good things to improve the built environment. And the determinants of health, I spent 4 years, I'll talk more about this, at the School of Population and Public Health at UBC. And the idea that there are elements of a community, be them social, economic, things like income level, education level, that depending on which community you live in, they have an influence on your health outcomes. It's not an individual level influence, it's usually referred to as a population level impact. So wealthy neighborhoods tend to have better health outcomes than poor neighborhoods, for example. But what I'd like to claim tonight is that there's also environmental determinants of health, and the built environment is a very important determinant of health. So I'm just going to switch. Do you have any questions while I switch gears here?
When you talk about determinants, are they all causal, or could be correlational too in there?
Definitely, most of the evidence cannot be claimed to be causal, because it is usually an environmental, like they're not case control studies. They're often doing work with administrative data sets, linking, trends, and so they're more correlational. So short answer is everything's connected, and it's not, but can't really make claims about cause. So, all right, so this is a video. We've done some work in the past with the BC Parks and Recreation Association. We're very interested in building healthy environments. So hopefully everyone can hear this. This is a colleague of mine just.
2009 is a year of dramatic change. Housing market conditions seem to be changing overnight, and so too is public reaction to the threat of climate change. Home purchasers are still looking for location, 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 but their preferences are including some new directions.
When my family was looking for a home, we wanted a place to live where my husband could walk or cycle to work and the kids could walk to school. This neighborhood fit perfectly. We can also walk to the grocery store, to the doctor's or dentist's office, and even to the beach.
This neighborhood design allows this family to rely on just one car. Not using a second car can save roughly $9,000 per year. And walking or cycling cuts the number of car trips per day by more than half. We need these kinds of reductions in urban vehicle trips to mitigate greenhouse gases and to slow down climate change. The grid pattern of streets in this neighborhood design distributes traffic evenly, and it makes cycle and walk connections short and easy. The subdivision, road, and walkway pattern encourages active transportation.
I'll cut that off there, just give you a quick intro. You can watch the rest of it online if you like. So there's a few things that I wanted to bring up from that. One is that there's a definite environmental benefit to investing in active transportation. I know you're at a sea level, I think a few meters above sea level here, so at a local level, you have some issues to be concerned about. So reducing your carbon emissions through reducing vehicle kilometers traveled is one very important benefit. And I don't know offhand what your climate action targets are, but this is a really great strategy to invest in active transportation. The City of Vancouver, for example, has very ambitious targets set that all trips in the City of Vancouver will be, 50% of trips in the City of Vancouver by 2020 will be by active modes, sustainable modes, so that includes transit, walking, and cycling. So in thinking about this, think what could your city do? What are the targets you could imagine? And I'll show you some data on where you're at right now. So let me just get back to presentation mode here. And away we go. So just to give you a little bit of context, my work at UBC was with a gentleman named Dr. Clyde Hertzman, who recently passed away, but he was the CIHR Health Researcher of the Year 2 years ago, so the most prestigious health award in Canada. And his work focused on the idea of child development and how children are influenced by the environments they live in. And not just influenced physically at the touching and feeling, but by the nested scales of influence that children develop within. So this is just a quick example of the idea that child is raised in a family, but also is influenced by the residential and regional physical environments, and also the policy environments of the nation, as well as the services that are available to that family or child. And the keystone of his work was really that by measuring child development outcomes, there's a survey that all kindergarten students, teachers fill out on them, including students in elementary or kindergartens in this school district 48. It measures child development objectively using this 104-point questionnaire. And I know this may seem off topic, but the idea is that they can measure child development and then figure out how the environments or the neighborhoods where kids live actually can account for about 40 to 60% of the variability in that statistic. So how sound the school district overall is a somewhat high vulnerability. It's the kind of child development measure. But this Squamish actually is quite a bit of an outlier. It's a high vulnerability neighborhood. So that's the bottom dark red. It's a bit hard to see up there. But about 45%, under 45, between 40 and 45% of students in kindergarten are arriving at school with challenges in either the physical, social, emotional, cognitive, or linguistic areas that will make school a little bit more difficult for them. So this is just the idea that environments somehow influence their development, which then may have an influence throughout the rest of their life course. And in fact, the most recent evidence on this is the idea of epigenetics, which is a word that, if you've heard before, it basically means that the environments where kids live change the methylation of DNA. So the structure of a child's DNA is changed. If they're exposed to stressful environments or violence, they become very reactive and the reactions change. Higher cortisol levels. So all of that is to say that the environments where kids live influence their health. And my case here is that actually the environments where we live influence all kinds of our behaviors, and this is an example of some of work Megan Winters at UBC did, trying to explain cycling patterns in Vancouver and all those different factors, physical factors. Basically, she linked to surveys on bike use. So flatter elevation, population density, better facilities. The ones you can influence are connectivity and bicycle facilities. So end of trip facilities are a great area to invest in. And the other thing I wanted to show you, I did some work.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely.
Facilities?
So having kind of that change rooms in offices, there's zoning policy mechanisms to require offices to build change rooms or provide at very least secure bike storage. Or the city can take on initiatives to build a centralized bike storage or secure bike lockers in the downtown core, for example. That's a very low cost option, and it's often best to pair those investments with transit hubs. So if you have, the big challenge in a lot of cities is the last mile, as it's referred to. So the commuter can get on the bus and get to somewhere near their office, but then they have to connect that last step to get to their work. And if it's at 200 meters, that's probably walkable, but if it's getting off downtown and getting out to the end of the Oceanside area, that's probably they're going to need a bike. So having a locked up bike downtown would be a great way for them to make that connection. And the other factors here, I don't know if there's other things, but the other one, I think population density, you need a certain critical mass to make active transportation feasible. A bike lane with 3 people per day is not very useful, but if you have a thriving downtown core, then having more active transportation facilities is much more useful. So centralizing population, this does kind of underscore traditional kind of smart growth principles or compact mixed use land use. I probably should have said that up front, but this is all sort of endorsing the idea of centralized growth, and really mixed use land use is a key component of that. Anything else? Any other questions on that? Folks doing okay? I hope I'm not like way off in left field, or people are interested. Cool. There's some interesting data from ICBC on cycling accidents. So there's quite a few accidents in Vancouver. I made a really interesting map and people liked it, but the data for your city is a good news story. There's only 12 crashes in this 5-year period that were reported to ICBC. This is there's a relationship between number of cyclists and number of crashes. So if people are not cycling very much, there's also not very many crashes. And it's really hard to see. Sorry if people are, but that basically, north, I switched, this is also an awkward city to map. So I put it sideways in a few of my maps.
So north is left.
North is left, yes. But basically there's a little cluster down by the Tim Hortons on the south end. There's 2, actually just right at the edge of 2nd Ave, like on the north end of downtown, there's 4 accidents there. And this is all public data that's available online, but I'm happy to share more. I can actually give you the actual records with the date and time and stuff. Yeah.
How many of those occurred at night?
Great question.
They don't say. They do say the time of year. They don't say the time of day.
ICBC doesn't share that, or
No, in the data set that I have, it's not there. There's there's a push to get better data from them, especially in the last 3 years, because this is only up to 2010.
That's from ICBC.
Yeah. So, making and night lighting is a key thing I'm going to talk about in a little bit. So, just check on time here. Good, we're halfway through, so I got to speed up a bit. So this is a lot of my work is about population patterns, and just to set the stage, this is a cartogram which basically distorts the area of each school district relative to the number of children. So you can see that Howe Sound school district there, just above Vancouver, and that's just an interesting way to look at the province, but kind of showing you as well that the child population is somewhat stable in this period, which was 2001 to 2006, but I understand the city is now growing. Yeah, I do have some more recent statistics. And then I just looked at a few like interesting maps. I thought it was interesting to see how different people look at your city. There's some nice materials that have been prepared, but I went ahead and made a few maps myself. Quite hard to see here, I realize, but the basic idea is that in active transportation planning, proximity and distance really matters. So these concentric circles show basically the first one is 400 meters, the second is a kilometer, and a kilometer is about a 10-minute walk or a 5-minute cycle, and that basically encompasses just the downtown. Dentville and Hospital Hill, Valley Cliff are in the sort of 3-kilometer zone. A 30-minute walk is pretty far, so you can get those people on a bike, but they probably won't be walking all the way downtown. But giving you a little more data, I just wanted to pull out, this is the most recent 2011 population density from the census, basically showing where the people live. And a key consideration in active transportation is origins and destinations. Where do people live? Where do they go? So this is a density surface of the businesses, which probably is not a surprise to many of you, but downtown Squamish and areas along the highway. And then the thing I did that I think this is the most useful map is just putting those on top of each other. So the circles here represent the number of people per census block, and the underlying surface is the jobs or the employment centers. So this is the kind of map I would start with, and I have to be completely transparent. I'm not an expert at Squamish. I'm not, I drive through here like a lot of other people. I've been to the House Sound Brew Pub, I've done some work around here, but this presentation, I'm not trying to make recommendations. I don't know your city, so I'm trying to give you some tools to think about, and hopefully that gives you some material to make arguments in favor or oppose certain things. But 2 weeks is not enough time to learn everything about the city. But one useful tool is looking at the baseline data that are available. So for example, population, the growth in Statistics Canada census population was 14.8% between 2006 and 2012. So it's a very healthy growth rate, and it gives you a lot of opportunities. I understand there was also a lot of withdrawal in that time with the forestry sector kind of moving out of town. So in the next 5 years, I expect it's going to accelerate. And the other key thing here is there's about 4,000 kids under the age of 5. So if we're focusing on kids as a great place to start, that's 4,000 people who have to get around the city. The other, the really interesting statistics from the census, or the NHS as it's now, this long form census is called, is this idea. They added a question on mode of transportation. This has been there for the last 10 years. So this gives us a breakdown on basically mode share. And mode share is the mode which people use to commute. And I just broke that out into a pie chart for you. So when I said the City of Vancouver's goal is to get 50% of trips using walking, cycling, and public transit, that's a long ways to go, but that's not to say City also doubled their trips in the last 5 years. So City of Vancouver's gone from like something like 12 to something like 18 or 20%, and this is, you have a lot of opportunity here. The other thing I wanted to share with you is just some context. When you see 4%, 4% using bicycle, this is a map of the City of Vancouver data by neighborhood, and that third darkest green, so most of Vancouver is in that 4 to 10%. You're actually doing quite well. So 4% is nothing to sneeze at. And the other thing, the piece of data from the NHS that I thought was very interesting, your median commuting duration is 11 minutes. So on average, people in the city have very short commutes. Mine, that is mostly cars, so it is a very small distance to travel. And there's one other question that wasn't on this census, but the previous year, in 2006, there were 986 or so people commuting outside of this census subdivision. So that's about 1,000 people, and probably today, maybe 1,200 that are driving either out past Squamish or to Vancouver. So it still leaves about 8,000 full-time workers. That's according to the census. So I
We
don't
lost
know.
our counter
Yeah.
quite a while ago.
But that's a ballpark number.
That was 2006, though,
2006,
right?
yeah.
So it was a very different
True.
Squamish.
That's true, and the highway's been much improved. So maybe it's much higher now. But that question was not asked on this census. This gives you some context for City of Vancouver on drive times, commute times. The lowest category is like non-existent, and you guys are at the low end of that first range. So your commute times are very short here. And I do hope this presentation will be available in some way if people want it. I'm happy to share it. So these maps are also online on my blog. So I just wanted to run through a few maps that the city has produced that I thought were quite useful. So this is just the bike routes. I just drove up to Quest University, so I got to see that great, it's not a separated bike lane, but it is a painted line, which hopefully, you know, is a very affordable method to adding bike routes. And I did look through the multimodal study that was recently done, and this suggested network of bike routes. I really don't know what how much support there is for this, but seems like a great place to start. Like, there's no reason for me to tell you where to put your routes. This study did a great job. So I'm hoping that there's some funding or at least motivation to get these projects off the ground. And it doesn't have to cost a lot. That's the other thing. Like, paint is not that expensive. Separated bike lanes downtown would be a really nice amenity, but it's another conversation.
And that's all that's based on schools? Is that what I see there highlighted on there?
This one, I do
Sure.
believe there was a focus on, at least the city's website does say that there's a focus on safe routes to schools as a strategy for building, and that's something I'll pull up in a couple slides. So pedestrian networks, again, there's great plans on these maps. I don't know enough about the city to say which routes to build first, but my suggestion and my focus of this presentation is generally that downtown is the place that needs to be prioritized, but that's just my personal opinion. And the other, the transportation network that's been put in place, I'm so happy to see these. It's amazing that you do have great transportation. We were just counting people on buses, and there's like 12 people on the bus right now, so it's amazing to see that get used. And that means the bus is like the enabler that allows people to then make those connections by bike. You know, bike to the bus, take the bus downtown, walk. So that you need that middle connection. The other thing I wanted to say is that all of these active transportation ideas really focus a lens on social equity and social justice, because there's no barrier to, I mean, a bike is $300 and walking is free. So by providing infrastructure to enable people to make healthy choices, you're also leveling the playing field for families with children who can't afford a second car, or new immigrants who want to move here and can't afford to have a car at all. So there's an important benefit that's not just the physical health, but the emotional, different connections here. So the multimodal plan, truthfully, it was a 100-page document, didn't read every page, but I read the executive summary and it seemed good. The thing I wanted to touch on quickly is just, I know it's on the topic tonight, so I hope there is maps later, but this was the map that I got on the truck route. And I'll just say that there's an option here that's purple, and there's an option through the downtown. And the next map I had prepared was the schools in that area. And I kind of lined them up so you could see that it's a little bit hard actually, but basically seemed like the route along 7th Ave doesn't go by the schools, but the route through the other areas do pass the schools. So trying to keep that in mind as where we put, there's kind of this concept in contemporary planning called there's roads and there's streets. Streets are for people, roads are for cars. And when you start trying to build stroads, and it gets messy. So you want to separate, dedicate arterials for trucking and commercial traffic. And then the downtown can be freed up for pedestrian activities. And talk more about downtown in a second. The last couple things here, we've got snow clearing as another opportunity if you prioritize clearing on active transportation routes. It's a great, simple investment. I know the steep hills probably come first, but maybe a third priority could go in here. And the other thing that was kind of cool is you have this map of all the street lights, which are all these little green dots, and some of them are requiring urgent attention. But there's a bit of a gap. The trail that's just off the highway that connects the north end to the south end doesn't have any lights on it, and I don't know what it would cost to light it, but that's maybe an option that would make that connection a little safer. And there are great sidewalks downtown. This is from the website, which is a great interface, but it's hard to export. But the yellow lines along the streets show there's already some good connections. So building on that infrastructure, I'd say that the key area, I did actually do a little poll on Twitter before this. A few friends suggested if there was one suggestion for improving the urban core, it would be shut down Cleveland Avenue for pedestrians and move the parking to the back side so that there was a really nice boulevard where people could shop and feel safe, and the parking would just be behind the buildings. Or I heard there's also the option to build a centralized parking facility and kind of get the cars all put in one place and then free up the rest of the space for better quality urban design. And I think there's a lot of opportunities that could be unlocked by having more people in the downtown area. So this was the build-out model for the ocean front. And I won't say anything more except that having more people in the downtown core would really support a vibrant mixed-use area. And the key consideration is connecting this new area with a really good backbone to the existing downtown core. If they're separated and fragmented, the new one will probably win out and the downtown will lose. But if it's a transparent connection, then people just continue their walk. So that's kind of the signpost, the end of that section. Any questions on those? I know Dan, you made those. Did you make any of those?
Yeah, I did.
Do you work with the multimodal folks?
I did, yeah. Yeah, that was an interesting project.
So if anyone has ideas, I mean, Dan, you'll be here to make sure people can follow up with you.
Yeah, and a lot of those layers have been updated.
Okay,
Like
yeah.
lanes and sidewalks.
So when they're all on an open data site, I'll be able to get them. So you saw the walkability map I made before.
Sorry, Anthony, you have a question?
Yes, please.
I've done a couple of studies, one in Seattle and one or the Puget Sound and one in
great.
San Francisco Bay.
Okay.
And just for your guidance,
Yep.
the present and future ferries, high-speed passenger only, will be fitted out to take up to 30 bikes.
Awesome. Wow. Are those coming to Squamish?
No.
BC
Oh,
ferries
just
like
Not
that.
yet.
Okay.
Let's work on it. When we get many people.
That'd be amazing if you could lock your bike on a BC ferry.
No, these
Well,
are
that's stay in the
new
downtown.
high-speed ferries. In Seattle, they have about 5 new routes they are looking at because it's so spread out on islands and across bays, etc. So it's a little more demand there than here, but the same thing in San Francisco. They are preparing a new terminal for 13 vessels at one time.
Wow. Well,
So it's going to be a very, very interesting thing to follow.
I think
And
they are.
that means the
Sorry.
recreational and transit is considered equal.
Right. Yeah, it's I mean, if you go to Europe, Copenhagen, bikes are everywhere. We're really playing catch up in North America. So I basically did want to show you that the walkscore.com, which was really useful, and real estate agents love to sell homes that are high walk score ratings. Overall, they rate this city as a 39 out of 100, which is very low. And it's a bit unfair. I don't actually love this data set. It's very coarse grained, and it doesn't really show the downtown as walkable. That was my goal of creating my own walkability index, was to make it much more detailed and fine-grained. There's not a lot of work to do. If there's one project that you wanted to do, the walkability mapping for your city would be really quite easy to do. It's just a matter of getting the right data and running the numbers. But this is what it shows, so we could improve on that quite a bit. The one thing WalkScore does have is lists all the amenities, so you can see where there's good amenities right now. And the other cool thing you can do is this little mask that shows how far you can walk within 15 minutes from any point. So from the downtown, this is just like those concentric circles I showed, but now it's doing it with the road network instead of just a circle. So downtown is about a 15-minute walk. From downtown, you can bike just up to the top of basically the rail yards there. But in a car, you can drive almost up to Brackendale in 15 minutes. So you can see what we're competing with here. The car is a pretty clear winner, but it also does have significant environmental and social justice issues. And not to mention the health benefits of
That's just
walking.
Doug driving to Brackendale.
Yeah.
He's a little slow.
It takes until he gets his motor on his bike.
So,
Cold outside.
but that's a fun tool to play with, because you can say where you want to live and see how far you can get. The other thing I did, just a few little random calculations, like the driving distance, so the walking distance from up here on Thunderbird Ridge is an hour and a half versus a 30-minute cycle or an 11-minute drive. So that's the average commute. And obviously that person's probably not going to be walking an hour and a half. So if you really want to make a difference, you need to build more residential in the downtown area or close to businesses. It's just not practical to ask people to walk this far. So the other areas up here, it's a little shorter, half an hour walk, just basically compared to an 8-minute drive. So this is the last section, and this is really the scientific evidence that supports investments in healthy built environments. So this is produced by the Provincial Health Services Authority, but I was involved in some of the review. And basically the idea is these 5 areas are kind of themes that you can use to group built environment principles, basically physical features, through the impacts and the health outcomes. So this is just the brief, but here's a little more detail, and I'll read you a couple. For example, in the healthy transportation, some of the principles that you can employ are enable mobility for all ages and abilities by creating supportive infrastructure and implementing appropriate policies and programs. It's kind of vague, but make active transportation convenient and safe, build attractive road, rail, and waterway networks, and encourage use of public transit, prioritize safety. So from the health authorities' perspectives, those are the issues they are most focused on in terms of changing built environment practice. And this is their kind of tool to say to urban planners, these are the things that we think are important. And obviously there are some other connections through the neighborhood design focus. And I'll show you, this is the full diagram, which basically takes each of these principles and elaborates on the pathways or the linkages which influence health outcomes. So to take an example, make active transportation convenient and safe. It reduces noise, increases safety, which in turn reduces injury rates and increases walking, which in turn improves social connectivity. So this idea of social isolation can be influenced by increased walking. There's the idea of increased physical activity, which is probably the one everyone thinks of first, is the idea that if you get people walking, they're more active. And it's not even like they have to make a decision, do I go running tonight or not? They're just walking to work every day. And that extra 30 minutes of physical activity every day can have dramatic health impacts. The biggest opportunity in increasing physical activity is not that 10% who are really active, it's the 80% who are not active. And if you can just tip the scales a little bit and take that 80% and make them walk just a little bit, that really changes healthcare budgets dramatically. There's lots of modeling to show that. But in essence, if you're more active, you have lower obesity, lower chance of injuries, lower all-cause mortality, increased mental health, and lower chronic disease. So there's a whole bunch of these pathways here. I'm just closing in on 45 minutes, so I'm happy to show you these quickly. There are some interesting environmental impacts or environmental planning principles that also have health benefits. So it's not just transportation. And then the other area is this urban design focus. So just for an example, the enhanced connectivity with efficient and safe networks. So making sure that you have a nice walkable network is improving air quality, improving traffic safety, reducing the VKT or vehicle kilometers traveled, improving cycling, walking, and physical activity outcomes. So this is the evidence. This is actually followed up with about 40 pages of literature reviews that are scientifically peer-reviewed journals. And this is a draft. It was as of last month. So we're back to the beginning here. But just to wrap things up, I guess, overall, the key principle I wanted to underscore is that the built environment will influence the health and well-being of the people who live in the city. And they may not even know they're healthier. They may not realize a cognitive choice like I'm going to be more active, but because there is a bike lane, they will bike. And because there are sidewalks and no cars on the main street downtown, they'll choose to park their car and go walk for the afternoon instead of driving from Walmart to Home Depot and Rona. So the idea is that if you just make subtle changes, you will change behaviors. You've done a lot of great work. The city is well positioned to, you've got plans in place, you just have to put some money behind them. And taking a little money out of road, usually active transportation gets about 1 to 3% of total road budgets. So if you could take 5%, you'd be light years ahead of the game. And then the idea that using census data to track change is a great opportunity. In 4 years, you'll have new census data you can check to see what your outcomes are, and having those reliable indicators does a lot of the work for you. So you can set good targets. You may want a walkability map if that's the case. You have my card, but there's lots of people out there. And the other key thing is there's lots of evidence to back this up. So if there's deniers on council, you can send them this brief. It's 4 pages with all those little linkages and say, pick your favorite transit, active transportation investment and say, look at all the benefits. They're very straightforward. So with that, I'll let you look at the view. I was hiking the Chief a couple months ago and I took this picture, thinking maybe one day I'll present to Squamish Council. But thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. We'll open the floor for discussion. Does anybody have any questions or mapping everything that you
Yeah, I mean, the whole idea around walkability is interesting as well. I'd be curious to know where the data for that walkability.
Use OpenStreetMap. It's the
OpenStreetMap?
best source because it has all the trails in it usually. But if I can get city data with proper trail networks, then I hate to use just roads because they miss all those little connections that the trails provide. So it's basically, it's a model builder script that you put in a bunch of stuff and it spits out a number or a surface. So it's kind of a I've optimized it. My goal is to map walkability for every city in Canada and potentially the world, so it's just,
Small goal.
yeah.
Very Lauren and
Yeah, well, I know in the last meeting I wasn't here, but I see there was talk about the hills and how that affects our active transportation.
Yes.
And so I don't
Yeah.
know, we're not unique in that
No,
we have hills.
not at all.
But
You've got some big ones, but there's innovative things out there. Like there's actually a rope tow that you can put on. There's some cities in Europe that have that. I mean, that would get you in the news as a global leader. It would be kind of fun.
get to the utilities.
But
Rope to a skyline.
the other things though are
Would you
like,
need investment?
you know, a good
Absolutely.
separated lane that you can just take your time and pedal slowly. If it's, you know, if there's cars between physical separation, I think that it is generally, the evidence shows it's worth investing in physically separated bike lanes instead of just paint. Doing it, I mean, you can do paint as an intermediate step, but physical separation really gets, one of the bellwethers of cycling infrastructure is how many women ride. That's actually like a key indicator. And they just, the evidence on surveys shows that women much prefer separated bike lanes, especially with kids. So, and also focus on safe routes to school. That's, the evidence is clear, like that's the best low-hanging fruit, so. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, Sue. Councillor Heinzman.
Yeah, one thing you said, and obviously there's degrees of what would be best infrastructure, but one thing you said was paint is cheap.
Yeah. Well,
And it's cheap as talk, I guess, but paint is cheap. And sometimes that's really all we need to start at, just to get going, and we forget how cheap paint is really in the whole grand scheme of things. So we need to obviously do that more, I think.
there's probably 2 or 3 routes that you could put in this like next budget cycle. I don't know, but like the city of Chicago put in 100 miles of bike lanes in a year. The mayor just decided, and they did it, and that was it. It was political will.
Wasn't massively expensive, and it's not just painting lines, it's painting the right communications, whether it's icons or all that sort of thing. I think it's important to understand the history of Squamish and how it was built, because it wasn't ever planned as one city. It was a series of villages, basically,
Right.
that were linked when a water and sewage system went in. So you've got these sort of pods that are now all big one.
Yeah, you see that in the population map for sure. Those little
Yeah.
circles that they're all over. A model like the city of Calgary, they've been very intentional on building not bike lanes but pathways and trail networks. And that, because you do have some space on the edges of, you know, bike lanes on the highway are probably not the best thing, but really building a nice backbone of a trail network that connected through to some of these suburbs, that would probably be a little more appropriate design choice for this area. But I'm not an engineer, and I don't know how to design bike lanes per se. But
Well, I agree, sometimes bike lanes are the best option, that separated paths, and we do have quite a few
oh yeah,
commuter paths.
yeah, there's
They
some nice
could be
ones.
augmented and made better, obviously, and
Yeah.
better marked, better communicated, all those things. But yeah, sometimes bike lanes just aren't actually the best idea, best approach for certain areas.
Yeah. Local context is like the most important thing. So.
Yeah.
Councillor Rees.
Yeah, paint isn't always cheap. I mean, I agree with you. You want to go after these things, but it reminds me when I first ran for council 5 years ago at the all candidates meeting, or the SORC all candidates meeting that some of you might have been at. A friend of mine who's with the Trail Society wanted us to promise to spend 10% of our annual paving budget on trails. And our annual paving budget then and now is about $1 million, and that's just upgrading existing roads and so forth, and redoing them when they're needed and so forth. So he was looking for a commitment to spend $100,000, and I think most people, and me included, said, well, we can't promise these things, you know, it's a budget issue and stuff. In the next year, right out of the budget, we spent $256,000 as the first half of the government road upgrade, and we expected to get a 50% grant from the province for the other $256,000, which didn't come through. And so next year we had to spend another $256,000. So the government road upgrade, which people will look at and say, well, that's just paint on the road on both sides. Not all roads lend themselves to retrofitting a bike lane, and we had to widen and improve the shoulders, all of you remember that. So over 2 years it cost $512,000. Don't ask me why I remember these numbers, but it's not a simple paint job.
No,
There are some roads that do, but it's the retrofit that's so problematic. If the road wasn't designed with bikes in mind in the first place, and some of these older roads weren't. And that's an old highway, it's not just paint.
Absolutely. I think there's certain, especially signal stuff, when you start getting into lighting, changing infrastructure systems, and I know that even the time to put people out there to paint the roads and market gets quite expensive very quickly. I would say there probably are a few opportunities that, if you looked at the multimodal plan, may have a few of those dotted lines that are worth just taking a look at and figuring out. Maybe the plan already identified a few, and just don't be scared to take 5% of the budget. $50,000 would probably get you 2 or 3 new bike lanes. So if you could get, and the benefit of that is if you could double your, if you get a really
Our
good
budget's 100, so we're
100,000.
already
You said $1 million.
50. For the paving budget.
Paving
so
budget's
100,000.
100,000.
Bike lane issues.
Okay, so then 5,000 is not going to get you too much paint. That's that's tricky.
No,
But,
100,000 for the bikes.
For the bike
Oh,
lane.
and that's already dedicated?
That's been pretty consistent over.
10%. That is great. That's kind of what I was suggesting. So you're already there.
And without interrupting, but we've also, on top of that, have spent money with gas tax money and stuff. The corridor trail, we've been spending hundreds of thousands of dollars in addition to that on what is a dedicated bike and pedestrian off-road separated and so forth away from the highway.
Yeah.
There's been significant monies expended. The problem and the challenge, and you hit on it, is that we're a stretched out community with all these little pods. And, the whole thing wasn't built in a grid. It was laid out the wrong way. And so it's a real challenge and an expensive challenge to connect them all.
So,
Especially with the limited tax base that we have.
absolutely,
No,
but
you're
on the
doing
note
great.
of expensive and unaffordable, there's a new grant available that when you sent me, and I was sent by a few other people, and I looked into the grant from the BC government, that $640,000 is available to lower mainland communities to invest in cycling infrastructure. And I was hoping to put a motion on the table just to refer to staff to investigate the grant, because we have to,
I would assume they're doing that already.
we have to actually put something forward to.
640 total?
640,000 of the new funding available to lower mainland in total. In addition, 500,000 is available for smaller scale projects as well. So 600, there's a whole bunch of different grants. So it's 1.14 million in Bike BC this year to expand biking lanes, trails, and paths for a healthier BC.
I'd just give staff
Yeah.
the
So
information.
can we just, do you guys need a recommendation to explore?
Part of the day-to-day.
You guys, part of the day-to-day, okay. That would be great.
There is also a BC Healthy Communities grant that's, I think they have like 40,000 total or so, and you can apply and get $4,000 to $6,000 to do health research. So if anyone you could probably get money to do a walkability analysis for the city. That would be really easy.
It's through LTBC.
BC Healthy Communities. It's Plan H is the new brand they've developed. It's
Excellent. Thank you so much.
no, thank